The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Benning's training grounds, turning the red clay into a furnace beneath their boots. Emma Richardson stood at the end of the formation, her 5'3" frame dwarfed by the soldiers around her. Sweat dripped down her temples, stinging her eyes as she struggled to maintain the rigid attention stance Drill Sergeant James Morrison demanded. "Move faster, Richardson! My grandmother runs faster than you, and she's been dead for 5 years!" Morrison's voice cut through the humid air like a whip. Emma's legs trembled as she pushed through another set of burpees. Around her, the other recruits moved with practiced efficiency. Michael Chen, a former college athlete, barely broke a sweat. William Torres, who'd grown up working construction with his father, treated the obstacle course like a playground. Even Sophia Grant, another woman in their platoon, seemed to glide through the exercises with natural grace. But Emma fell behind. Again. "Richardson, you're holding up the entire platoon," Morrison barked, his weathered face inches from hers. "Drop and give me 20. As Emma hit the ground, she heard the whispers. They'd started on day 1 and hadn't stopped. "Why'd she even enlist?" Benjamin Carter muttered to Michael, not bothering to lower his voice. "She can barely carry her own pack." "Probably thought the army would be like summer camp," Michael replied with a snort. "Someone's gonna have to carry her through this." Emma completed her push-ups, her arms shaking, and scrambled back into formation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training field, and she could feel 20 pairs of eyes on her back, judging, dismissing, mocking. That evening in the barracks, Emma sat on her bunk, carefully wrapping her swollen ankles. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the rows of identical metal beds. Most of the platoon had gone to the chow hall, but Emma had stayed behind, too exhausted to face more sideways glances and barely concealed laughter. "You okay?" Ava Martinez appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes showing something that might have been concern or pity. Emma couldn't tell which was worse. "I'm fine," Emma replied, her voice flat. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but—" Ava hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe this isn't for you. There's no shame in realizing the military life isn't what you expected. Better to figure it out now than later." Emma's jaw tightened. "I'm not quitting." "It's not about quitting. It's about being realistic. You're struggling with the basic stuff. What happens when we get to advanced training? What happens in a real combat situation?" Ava's tone was gentle, but her words hit like hammers. "I wouldn't want someone on my team who couldn't keep up. It's not personal. It's about survival." After Ava left, Emma lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. The words echoed in her mind, mixing with the hundreds of other comments she'd endured over the past 3 weeks. She reached down and touched her right calf, feeling the raised lines of the tattoo hidden beneath her uniform pants. No one had seen it yet. She'd been careful during the rushed shower times, always keeping that leg turned away, always dressing quickly. The tattoo was her secret, her burden, her reminder. The next morning brought a new nightmare. The rappelling tower. Emma stood at the base of the 60-foot structure, watching as her fellow recruits descended with varying degrees of confidence. William practically bounced down the wall, grinning like he was at an amusement park. Sophia moved carefully but steadily, her form textbook perfect. Then it was Emma's turn. "Richardson, get your gear on and get up there!" Morrison shouted. Emma's hands shook as she clipped into the harness. The metal carabiners felt foreign and untrustworthy. She began the climb up the ladder, each rung feeling higher than the last. By the time she reached the platform at the top, her breathing was ragged and her vision swam. "On my count, Richardson. 3, 2, 1, go!" Emma leaned back into the harness. For a moment, she hung suspended in the air, the ground impossibly far below. Then panic seized her. Her hands locked on the rope, refusing to let it slide through her gloves. She hung there, frozen, while the entire platoon watched from below. "Move, Richardson! Let the rope slide!" Morrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I can't!" The words escaped before she could stop them. "She's going to get us all killed in the field," Benjamin said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Freezing up like that, that's how people die." Charlotte Webb, a quiet recruit who rarely spoke, added in a whisper that somehow carried, "Why don't they just cut her loose?" "She's dead weight." It took 2 instructors climbing up to talk Emma through the descent. By the time her feet touched the ground, her face was streaked with tears she couldn't control. The shame burned hotter than the Georgia sun. That night, Emma sat in a bathroom stall long after lights out, her head in her hands. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices from the neighboring bay. "I'm serious, man. Richardson's gonna get someone hurt," Ethan Rodriguez was saying. "We're only 3 weeks in. Imagine what happens when the real pressure starts." "Maybe she'll wash out before then," Michael replied. "Save us all the trouble." "I almost feel bad for her," Sophia chimed in. "But Ethan's right. In a combat zone, you need people you can count on. She can barely count on herself." Emma pulled her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. She thought about calling her aunt, the only family she had left, and telling her it was over. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she didn't belong here, but then she thought about why she'd enlisted in the first place. The memories she was running from, the person she used to be, the person she could never be again. She rolled up her right pant leg and looked at the tattoo in the dim light filtering under the stall door. The ink was old, the lines slightly faded, but the symbol was unmistakable. She traced it with one finger, feeling the familiar texture of the scar tissue beneath. No, she wouldn't quit. She couldn't. The next day brought the combat fitness test, a timed 2-mile run followed by ammunition can lifts, a dummy drag, and a combat maneuver course. Emma knew before it started that she would fail. She did. While Michael finished in under 15 minutes, Emma struggled across the finish line at 23 minutes, her lungs burning and her legs like jelly. She couldn't lift the ammunition cans the required number of times. She barely managed to drag the 180-pound dummy half the required distance. Morrison watched with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When Emma finally collapsed at the end, gasping for breath, he walked over and looked down at her. "Richardson, in my office, 1,600 hours." The platoon exchanged knowing glances. Everyone knew what that meant. Emma Richardson was done. Emma sat outside Drill Sergeant Morrison's office, her uniform still damp with sweat from the failed fitness test. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices, Morrison's gruff tone, and another voice, calmer and more measured. She couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. She knew what was coming. The door opened, and Morrison gestured her inside. "Get in here, Richardson." Emma stood and entered the cramped office. Morrison sat behind a metal desk covered with paperwork and coffee-stained folders. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sharp grey eyes that seemed to see through every facade. "Sit down." Emma obeyed, her back straight, despite the exhaustion weighing down every muscle. Morrison was silent for a long moment, just watching her. Finally, he spoke. "You're failing, Richardson. You know that. I know that. The entire platoon knows that." He paused. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't recommend you for separation right now." Emma's throat tightened. She'd prepared herself for this moment, but now that it was here, the words wouldn't come. What could she say? That she was trying her hardest? That wasn't good enough in the army? That she had nowhere else to go? That sounded like desperation, not dedication. "I asked you a question, Private." "I don't have a good reason, Drill Sergeant," Emma said quietly, "except that I'm not giving up." Not giving up isn't the same as being capable. Right now, you're a liability. In a real unit, you'd be the weak link that gets good soldiers killed. Morrison's words were harsh, but his tone had shifted slightly. Less anger, more assessment. Why'd you enlist, Richardson? Really? Emma hesitated. The truth was complicated, painful, and private. But something in Morrison's expression, a hint of genuine curiosity rather than judgment, made her speak. I needed to prove I could survive something difficult, she said. I needed to know I was stronger than I thought I was. Why? Because, Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because I used to be someone who could do anything, and then I wasn't, and I need to find out if that person still exists somewhere inside me. Morrison leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. That's not good enough, Richardson. This isn't therapy. This isn't a personal journey of self-discovery. This is the United States Army, and we have one mission: to fight and win our nation's wars. If you can't contribute to that mission, you don't belong here. I can contribute, Drill Sergeant. I just need more time. Time isn't something we have the luxury of wasting. Morrison pulled out a form from his desk drawer. The dreaded separation paperwork. I'm going to be straight with you. You have until Friday to show me something, anything, that proves you belong in my army. That's 3 days. 3 days to demonstrate that keeping you here isn't a mistake that'll haunt me when you get yourself or someone else killed downrange. Emma's heart sank. 3 days? How was she supposed to transform herself in 3 days? Dismissed. Emma stood, saluted, and walked out of the office with her head held high, even though inside she was crumbling. 3 days to become someone she wasn't sure she could be anymore. That evening, while the rest of the platoon relaxed during their precious free hour, Emma returned to the training grounds alone. The obstacle course loomed in the fading light, its walls and barriers looking like insurmountable mountains. She approached the first obstacle, a 6-foot wall that she'd failed to scale that morning. She jumped. Her fingers caught the top edge, but her arms gave out immediately. She fell back into the sand. She tried again, and again, and again. You're doing it wrong. Emma spun around to find Olivia Chen, Michael's younger sister and one of the more talented recruits in the platoon, standing a few feet away. Olivia was lean and athletic, with the kind of natural coordination Emma had once possessed in what felt like another lifetime. I didn't ask for help, Emma said, more defensively than she intended. I know, but you need it anyway. Olivia walked over to the wall. You're trying to muscle through it. But you're not strong enough for that, not yet anyway. You need to use technique instead. Why are you helping me? I thought everyone wanted me gone. Olivia shrugged. Most of them do, but I figure if you're stubborn enough to be out here alone when you could be resting, maybe you're worth giving a chance. She demonstrated the proper approach to the wall. Watch. It's not about pulling yourself up with just your arms. You use your legs to walk up while pulling. Momentum and technique beat raw strength. For the next hour, Olivia worked with Emma, showing her techniques for each obstacle. How to distribute her weight on the rope climb. How to keep her center of gravity low during the low crawl. How to breathe during the run to avoid the cramps that always seized Emma's sides. Why are you really doing this? Emma asked as they took a water break. Olivia was quiet for a moment. My brother Michael, he's a good guy, but he's never struggled with anything physical in his life. He doesn't understand what it's like to have to fight for every inch. But I do. She looked at Emma directly. I had juvenile arthritis when I was younger. Doctors said I'd never be an athlete. I proved them wrong, but it wasn't easy. When I look at you, I see someone fighting. Most people don't even try that hard. Emma felt something shift in her chest, not quite hope, but close to it. Over the next 2 days, Emma trained with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She woke an hour before réveillé to run. She stayed after scheduled training to practice the obstacles. She pushed through the pain in her muscles and the doubt in her mind. Olivia continued to help when she could, but she made sure to do it discreetly. Emma understood. Olivia had her own reputation to maintain, and being seen as Emma's ally could damage it. On Wednesday evening, Emma managed to scale the 6-foot wall for the first time. She hung at the top for a moment, her arms trembling, before dropping to the other side. It wasn't graceful, but she'd done it. "Better," Olivia said with an approving nod. "Now do it 9 more times." But improvement in physical performance didn't change the platoon's perception. If anything, the mockery intensified as her desperation became more obvious. "Look at Richardson," Benjamin said loudly during Thursday's lunch. "Still thinks she can make it. It's almost sad." 3-to-1 odds she washes out by Monday, William added, and several others laughed and nodded. Charlotte, sitting nearby, didn't laugh, but didn't defend Emma either. Her silence felt like its own form of agreement. Emma kept her head down and ate her meal quickly, then headed back to the barracks to change for the afternoon session. She was alone in the bay when she heard footsteps behind her. "Emma, wait." She turned to find Ava standing in the doorway, her expression troubled. "I wanted to apologize," Ava said, "for what I said last week, about you not belonging here. That was out of line." "It's fine," Emma replied automatically. "No, it's not fine. I was being judgmental without knowing your story." Ava stepped closer. "I've been watching you these past few days. The way you keep pushing even when everyone's against you, that takes guts. More guts than a lot of people here have, including me." Emma didn't know what to say. The unexpected kindness felt foreign after weeks of hostility. "I still don't know if you'll make it," Ava continued honestly. "But I respect that you're trying, really trying, not just going through the motions." After Ava left, Emma sat on her bunk and allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The exhaustion was bone deep. Every part of her body hurt. She'd pushed herself harder in 3 days than she had in the previous 3 weeks, and she still didn't know if it would be enough. She reached down and touched her right calf again, feeling the outline of the tattoo through her uniform. Tomorrow was Friday, Morrison's deadline. Tomorrow would determine whether her time here ended or whether she'd earned the right to keep fighting. That night, Emma barely slept. She replayed techniques in her mind, visualized herself succeeding at each task, and tried to silence the voice that whispered she was fooling herself. When Reveille sounded at 0500 hours, Emma was already awake. She dressed quickly and headed to formation, her heart pounding. Morrison stood at the front of the assembled platoon, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Today, we're doing the obstacle course, timed runs. Everyone gives it their best." His eyes found Emma's. "Richardson, you're up first." Emma's stomach dropped. Going first meant everyone would watch. Every stumble, every failure would be on full display. She stepped up to the starting line. The course stretched out before her, 12 obstacles that had seemed impossible 3 weeks ago and still seemed daunting now. But she'd practiced. She'd learned. She'd pushed herself beyond what she thought she could endure. "On my mark," Morrison said. 3, 2, 1, go." Emma launched forward, her legs pumping. The first obstacle was a set of hurdles. She cleared them, not elegantly, but she cleared them. The 6-foot wall loomed ahead. She hit it with momentum, walked up with her legs while pulling with her arms, and hauled herself over the top. Behind her she could hear surprised murmurs from the platoon. The rope climb. She wrapped her legs in the technique Olivia had shown her, using her core and legs to take pressure off her arms. Hand over hand, she pulled herself up, touched the top, and descended. The tunnel crawl. She kept low and moved steadily, ignoring the sand in her eyes and mouth. One obstacle after another, Emma pushed through. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. When she hit the final obstacle, a 7-foot wall that required a running start, she almost faltered. This was the one she'd never completed successfully. She'd always stopped at the top, too afraid to drop down the other side. Emma ran at it full speed, jumped, caught the top, pulled herself up, and without letting herself think, swung her legs over and dropped to the ground on the other side. She'd done it. She sprinted through the finish line and immediately bent over, gasping for air. Morrison clicked his stopwatch and looked at the time. His expression gave nothing away. 17 minutes, 42 seconds, he announced. It wasn't fast. Michael had finished in 12 minutes. Sophia in 13. Even Charlotte had clocked in at 15. But 17 minutes, 42 seconds was Emma's fastest time by more than 5 minutes. She'd completed every single obstacle. For a moment, there was silence. Then Olivia started clapping, slowly at first, then faster. Ava joined in. One by one, others followed, not everyone, but enough. The applause felt strange, unfamiliar, but Emma straightened up and accepted it. Morrison walked over to her. "Richardson, you completed the course. Not fast, but you completed it." He paused. "That's improvement. Real improvement." "Thank you, Drill Sergeant." "Don't thank me yet. You're still behind where you need to be." "But—" Morrison's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You've earned the right to keep trying. That's all I'm giving you. A chance to keep proving yourself. Understand?" "Yes, Drill Sergeant." As Emma walked back to join the platoon, she caught Benjamin's eye. He wasn't smiling, but he gave her a small nod. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. It was a start. That evening, as Emma lay in her bunk, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 weeks. The faintest glimmer of hope. She was still the weakest in the platoon. She was still struggling. But she'd proven something to herself and to Morrison. She wasn't giving up. The tattoo on her calf seemed to pulse with warmth, as if reminding her of why she'd started this journey in the first place. No one knew about it yet. But someday, maybe, the truth would come out. For now, though, she had tomorrow to face, and the next day, and the day after that. One obstacle at a time, one day at a time, she would keep fighting, because that's what survivors did. The following weeks brought a punishing rhythm to Fort Benning. Wake at 0500, formation at 0520, breakfast at 0600, training until 1900, then equipment maintenance, study time, and lights out at 2200. The days blurred together in a haze of sweat, shouted commands, and aching muscles. Emma's improvement on the obstacle course had bought her time, but it hadn't changed her fundamental struggles. She was still the slowest runner, still the weakest during physical training, still the one who held up the formation during road marches with full packs. But she was no longer the easiest target for mockery. That had shifted to James Cooper, a recruit who joined the platoon 2 weeks late after recovering from a training injury at another base. James was tall and lanky, with a nervous energy that made him fumble equipment and miss commands. Within days, he'd become the new focus of the platoon's frustration. "Cooper, my dead grandmother moves faster than you!" Morrison's familiar refrain had found a new recipient. Emma watched as James struggled through the same gauntlet she'd endured, and she felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. She knew exactly what he was going through. The weight of everyone's eyes, the certainty that you're letting down the team, the suffocating fear that you'll never measure up. One afternoon during barracks maintenance, Emma found James sitting alone on his footlocker, staring at a letter from home. His eyes were red. "You okay?" Emma asked. James quickly wiped his face. "Yeah, fine, just family stuff." Emma recognized the lie. She'd told it often enough herself. She sat down on the footlocker across from him. "It gets easier. The training, I mean. Not easy, but easier." "Does it?" James's voice was bitter. "Because right now it feels like everyone's waiting for me to quit, like they've already decided I don't belong here." "I know the feeling," Emma said quietly. "Trust me, I know exactly that feeling." Over the next few days, Emma found herself gravitating toward James during breaks, offering small encouragements and practical advice. Olivia noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You're collecting strays now?" she asked, not unkindly. "Just trying to help someone who's going through what I went through," Emma replied. "That's good of you, but be careful. Helping him might remind people why they doubted you in the first place." Emma knew Olivia was right, but she couldn't stop herself. James reminded her too much of her own struggles, and maybe, in some small way, helping him was helping herself. The week of the Ruck March arrived, a 12-mile hike with 40-pound packs, weapons and full gear. It was designed to test endurance, mental toughness and teamwork. Recruits who fell too far behind would be pulled from the march and face remedial training or separation. The march began at dawn, with the platoon moving in formation along the winding roads of Fort Benning's training grounds. The October weather had cooled slightly, but the humidity still pressed down like a wet blanket. Within the first mile, Emma's shoulders ached from the pack straps digging into them. By mile 3, her feet burned with developing blisters, but she kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Don't think about the 9 miles left, just focus on the next 100 meters. Behind her she could hear James breathing heavily, his footsteps uneven. She glanced back and saw him struggling, his face pale and his gait increasingly unstable. "You good, Cooper?" she called back quietly. "I'm fine," he gasped. But he clearly wasn't. By mile 6, James was falling behind. The gap between him and the rest of the platoon widened with each step. Morrison noticed and dropped back to walk beside him. "Pick up the pace, Cooper. You're holding up the entire formation." "Yes." "Drill sergeant," James forced out between labored breaths. Emma slowed her own pace slightly, trying to give James a visual target to focus on. It was a small gesture, but it seemed to help. James fixed his eyes on her pack and forced himself to match her stride. At the halfway point, the platoon took a 10-minute break. James collapsed onto the ground, his chest heaving. Emma knelt beside him and handed him her water bottle. "Small sips," she instructed. "And try to cool down your wrists and neck. I don't think I can make it the rest of the way," James panted. "Yes, you can. You just need to break it down. Don't think about 6 more miles. Think about making it to that tree over there. Then the next landmark. One small goal at a time." Michael and William watched this exchange from a few feet away. Michael shook his head. "Richardson's babysitting again. Cooper needs to sink or swim on his own." "She's just being nice," Ava defended, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure it was the right approach. "Nice doesn't cut it in combat," Benjamin added. "What's she going to do downrange? Hold everyone's hand when things get tough?" Emma heard the comments but ignored them. She'd learned over the past weeks that she couldn't control what others thought of her. She could only control her own actions. When the break ended and the march resumed, James seemed slightly recovered. He managed to keep pace for the next 2 miles, but at mile 9, disaster struck. James's left ankle rolled on an uneven patch of road. He went down hard, crying out in pain. The formation halted as Morrison and another instructor rushed over. "Can you stand, Cooper?" James tried to put weight on his ankle and immediately crumpled. I don't think so, drill sergeant." Morrison's jaw tightened. He called for the medical vehicle that followed at a distance. Within minutes, James was being loaded into the back, his ruck march over. As the vehicle drove away, Morrison turned to the platoon. "That's what happens when you're not prepared. When you don't take training seriously, when you're weak." His eyes scanned the group. "Let this be a lesson. The only easy day was yesterday. Now move out." The final 3 miles were brutal. Emma's feet were covered in blisters that had long since popped. Her shoulders felt like they were on fire. Every step sent shocks of pain through her legs, but she kept moving, driven by a stubborn determination that had become her defining characteristic. When they finally crossed the finish line, Emma wanted to collapse like she had during the combat fitness test. Instead, she forced herself to remain standing, swaying slightly but upright. Morrison walked down the line, inspecting each recruit. When he reached Emma, he paused. "You made it, Richardson." "Yes, drill sergeant." "Barely. But you made it." There was something in his tone that Emma couldn't quite identify. "Your feet are torn up. Report to medical for treatment." Dismissed. At the medical station, a tired-looking sergeant cleaned and bandaged Emma's feet, while she tried not to wince. James was there too, his ankle wrapped and elevated, looking miserable. "Hey," Emma said softly. "How are you doing?" "I'm done," James said flatly. "They're recommending I recycle to another class after my ankle heals. 8 weeks of starting over with a new platoon." He looked at her with something like envy. "You made it, though, even with your feet looking like ground meat. You'll make it too, just later than planned. That's not the end of the world." "Easy for you to say. You're still in the fight." Emma wanted to tell him that staying in the fight didn't feel like winning most days. That every morning she woke up wondering if today would be the day she finally broke. But James didn't need to hear that. He needed to believe that persistence mattered, even when everything hurt. "You'll get another chance," Emma said firmly, "and you'll take everything you learned and apply it next time. You're not a quitter, Cooper. You just had bad luck with your ankle." James managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Richardson." That night, as Emma lay in her bunk with her bandaged feet throbbing, Sophia approached her. "That was decent of you, what you did for Cooper," Sophia said, staying back to help him keep pace. "It slowed me down," Emma admitted. "Probably made my feet worse." "Yeah, but you still finished, and you helped someone else almost finish." Sophia sat on the edge of Emma's bunk. "I judged you wrong at the beginning. I thought you were just another person who'd seen too many movies and didn't understand what they were getting into. But you've got heart, Richardson, more than most people here." The compliment caught Emma off guard. She didn't know how to respond. "Anyway," Sophia continued, standing up, "get some rest. We've got land navigation training tomorrow, and Morrison said it's going to make the ruck march look easy." As Sophia walked away, Emma felt that unfamiliar warmth again, the sense that maybe, slowly, she was earning not just tolerance, but actual respect from at least some of her fellow recruits. The next morning, Emma could barely walk. Her feet were swollen and painful despite the bandages. She limped to formation, wondering if Morrison would pull her from the day's training. He didn't. Instead, he announced a change to the schedule. "Today we're doing combat life-saving training. No running, no rucking. You'll learn how to treat battlefield injuries and perform under pressure when someone's life depends on your actions. This is just as important as physical fitness, maybe more important." The training took place in a mock field hospital set up in one of the warehouses. The platoon was divided into pairs and given scenarios to work through, treating gunshot wounds, stopping arterial bleeding, managing shock, performing CPR. Emma was paired with Ethan Rodriguez, who'd been one of her most vocal critics early in training. He'd since become more neutral toward her, neither hostile nor friendly. Their scenario involved a simulated casualty with a severed femoral artery. They had to apply a tourniquet correctly and quickly, then prepare the casualty for evacuation. Ethan took the lead, his hands steady and confident, but when the instructor added a complication, a second casualty appearing with a sucking chest wound, Ethan froze. He'd been trained on tourniquets, but the chest seal was new. He hesitated, looking between the two casualties, his confidence evaporating. Emma didn't hesitate. She'd studied the training manuals obsessively during her limited free time, determined to excel at something. She grabbed the chest seal kit and moved to the second casualty. "Talk me through it," she told Ethan as she worked. "The tourniquet first. You've got this. 2 inches above the wound, tighten until bleeding stops, note the time." Following her calm instructions, Ethan completed his task while Emma successfully sealed the chest wound. When the scenario ended, the instructor nodded approvingly. "Good teamwork. Richardson, excellent decision-making under pressure. Rodriguez, good execution once you got moving. Next pair." As they stepped aside, Ethan looked at Emma with new eyes. "You knew exactly what to do." "I study the manuals when I can't sleep," Emma admitted, "which is most nights." "I misjudged you," Ethan said quietly. "I thought, well, It doesn't matter what I thought. You've got skills that aren't all about physical strength. That scenario would have gone sideways if you hadn't known how to handle that chest seal." Emma didn't respond, but something inside her felt lighter, one more person who'd seen past her physical limitations to recognize that she had value. The rest of the day continued in the same vein. Emma excelled at the medical training, her attention to detail, and ability to stay calm under simulated pressure, impressing even Morrison. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Emma felt like she belonged. That evening, Charlotte approached Emma during the brief period before lights out. "Hey, Richardson, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you really here? I've heard people speculate, but what made you want to join the army?" Emma considered deflecting, giving a generic answer. But Charlotte's expression was genuinely curious, not judgmental. "I needed to prove something to myself," Emma said carefully. "I needed to know I could push through something hard, that I could be more than I thought I was." "That's vague," Charlotte observed, "but I get it. We've all got our reasons." She paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're tougher than most people here give you credit for. Tougher than I gave you credit for." After Charlotte left, Emma sat on her bunk and reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She was still struggling. She was still behind in most physical metrics, but the atmosphere around her had shifted. She was no longer invisible or merely an object of derision. People saw her as a person now, someone with strengths and weaknesses like everyone else, but there was still so much they didn't know about her. The tattoo on her calf remained hidden, a secret that felt heavier with each passing day. Sometimes Emma wondered what would happen if someone discovered it. Would it change their perception of her again? Would they understand what it meant, what she'd survived? She pulled up her pant leg and looked at the tattoo in the dim light from the hallway. The symbol was simple but powerful, a design that marked her as part of a very specific, very small group of people, a group that had survived the unsurvivable. But that was a story for another day. For now, Emma had to focus on getting through tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, just like she'd been doing since the day everything changed. November brought cooler temperatures to Fort Benning, though the training intensity only increased. The platoon had progressed past basic physical conditioning into more complex skills: marksmanship, tactical formations, weapons maintenance, and map reading. Emma's physical performance had plateaued. She was no longer the slowest recruit, thanks to 2 new additions to the platoon, but she wasn't setting any records either. What she lacked in raw physical prowess, however, she'd begun to compensate for with technical knowledge and attention to detail. Her rifle was always immaculate during inspections. Her uniform was perfectly pressed. Her locker arrangement followed regulations to the millimeter. Morrison had noticed. During a recent inspection, he'd paused at Emma's station longer than usual, checking her weapon with meticulous care. Finally, he'd handed it back with a curt nod. "Outstanding, Richardson." Those 2 words had meant more to Emma than any medal could have. The platoon was preparing for their final evaluation, a comprehensive test that would determine whether they successfully completed basic training or faced recycling to another class. The evaluation would include everything they'd learned: physical fitness, marksmanship, land navigation, tactical movements, and a final written examination. The pressure was immense. Even the most confident recruits felt the weight of it. Conversations in the barracks had shifted from casual banter to anxious discussions about test procedures and potential failure points. "If I don't qualify expert on the range, my dad's going to kill me," Michael said one evening, only half joking. His father was a retired army colonel who expected excellence. "The land nav course is what worries me," William admitted. "I can shoot, I can run, but finding coordinates with a map and compass, that's not natural for me." Emma listened but didn't contribute. She had her own concerns, primarily the physical fitness test that would be administered at the start of evaluation week. Her improvement had been steady but modest. She'd managed to shave 2 minutes off her 2-mile run time, bringing her down to 21 minutes. It was passing, but barely. One bad day, one twisted ankle, one moment of weakness, and she'd fail. The night before evaluations began, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, listening to the sounds of 30 other recruits breathing in the darkness. Some snored, others tossed and turned restlessly. The whole barracks hummed with nervous energy. Emma's thoughts drifted, as they often did during sleepless nights, to the time before the army, to the person she used to be, to the events that had led her here. She reached down and touched the tattoo through her pajama pants, feeling its familiar outline. How long could she keep it hidden? And what would happen when someone finally saw it? The next morning arrived too quickly. The platoon assembled on the physical training field at 600, the November air crisp enough to see their breath. Morrison stood before them, clipboard in hand. Today begins your final evaluation. Over the next 5 days, you will be tested on everything you've learned. Some of you will pass easily, some of you will struggle, and some of you won't make it at all. His eyes swept across the formation. The army doesn't need everyone. It needs the ones who have what it takes. Prove you're one of them. The physical fitness test began with the 2-mile run. Emma lined up with her assigned group, her heart pounding. She'd run this distance hundreds of times over the past months, but today it mattered more than ever. "On my mark!" the evaluator shouted. "Go!" Emma launched forward, finding her pace. Not too fast. She'd learned that mistake early on. Steady and consistent, saving energy for the final push. Around her, faster runners pulled ahead. Michael, Sophia, Olivia, even Charlotte. Emma let them go, focusing on her own race. The first mile was manageable. Her breathing found its rhythm. Her legs felt strong despite the early hour. She passed the halfway marker and checked her time, 10 minutes, 30 seconds. If she could maintain this pace, she'd finish around 21 minutes, passing, but close. The second mile was where everything got harder. Emma's lungs started burning. Her legs grew heavy. The voice in her head whispered that she should slow down, that she couldn't maintain this pace, that she was fooling herself. But she'd heard that voice before. She'd heard it every day for months, and every day she'd chosen to ignore it. Emma pushed harder, forcing her legs to keep turning over. She could see the finish line in the distance. 200 meters. 100 meters. 50. She crossed the line and immediately bent over, gasping for air. The evaluator clicked his stopwatch. Richardson, Emma, 20 minutes, 48 seconds. Emma could barely process the number. She'd broken 21 minutes. For the first time ever, she'd broken 21 minutes. It wasn't impressive by the platoon's standards. Michael had finished in under 14 minutes. But for Emma, it was a personal victory. The ammunition can lifts and other exercises followed. Emma performed adequately, hitting the minimum standards on each event. When the full results were tallied, she'd passed the fitness test with a score of 195 out of 300. The minimum passing score was 180. It was close, but a pass was a pass. Over the next 3 days, Emma navigated the remaining evaluations. The marksmanship qualification was nerve-wracking, but her steady hands and careful attention to fundamentals earned her a sharpshooter rating. Not the expert designation that Michael achieved, but respectable. The land navigation course tested her patience and map-reading skills, but she successfully located all 5 points within the time limit. The tactical exercises challenged her endurance, but she completed them without major errors. By Thursday evening, Emma was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. She'd passed everything so far. Only the final inspection and written examination remained. The inspection was scheduled for Friday morning. A comprehensive review of each recruit's person, uniform, weapon, and equipment. It was Morrison's last chance to identify deficiencies and the platoon's last chance to demonstrate the discipline they'd developed. Emma spent Thursday evening preparing obsessively. She cleaned her rifle for the third time, ensuring no carbon residue remained in any crevice. She pressed her uniform until the creases were razor-sharp. She polished her boots until she could see her reflection. She arranged her wall locker according to the detailed diagram provided, measuring the spacing between items with a ruler. Olivia, watching from her own bunk, shook her head with amusement. "Richardson, you're going to wear yourself out. It's good enough already." "Good enough isn't the same as perfect," Emma replied, adjusting a T-shirt that was already perfectly folded. "You sound like Morrison now," Olivia laughed. "That's either a really good sign or a really bad one." At 2100, the barracks fell silent for lights out. Emma lay in her bunk, mentally reviewing everything one more time. Uniform components, weapons inspection procedures, general orders, everything Morrison might ask. She finally drifted into fitful sleep around midnight. The next morning came too soon. The platoon dressed in their Class A uniforms, the formal dress uniform they'd only worn a handful of times during training. Emma moved carefully, making sure every detail was correct. Brass polished, ribbons aligned, name tape centered, not a thread out of place. At 0800, the platoon assembled in the barracks bay for inspection. Morrison entered, accompanied by Captain David Sullivan, the company commander who rarely involved himself in day-to-day training. Sullivan was a stern man in his mid-30s, with a reputation for being fair but exacting. "Attention!" Morrison commanded, and 30 recruits snapped to rigid positions by their bunks. The inspection began at the far end of the bay. Morrison and Sullivan moved methodically from recruit to recruit, examining uniforms, checking weapons, opening wall lockers. Sometimes they nodded approval. Other times Morrison called out deficiencies in a voice that carried through the entire room. "Hernandez, there's dust on your rifle bolt. Unacceptable. Williams, this T-shirt is out of alignment by 2 inches. Grant, your boots aren't polished to standard." Each criticism felt like a blow, even when directed at someone else. The tension in the room was suffocating. Emma stood at her position, barely breathing as Morrison and Sullivan drew closer. 3 recruits away, 2 recruits away, 1 recruit away. Then they were standing in front of her. "Richardson," Morrison said. "Present arms." Emma brought her rifle up in a smooth, practiced motion. Morrison took it, his experienced hands checking every component. The bolt, the chamber, the barrel, the magazine well. He inspected it for what felt like an eternity, looking for any flaw, any oversight. Finally, he handed it back. "Weapon is squared away." Relief flooded through Emma, but she maintained her rigid posture. Sullivan stepped forward to inspect her uniform. He checked her ribbons, her name tape, her brass. He walked around her, examining her from every angle. Then he opened her wall locker and methodically reviewed its contents. Everything was perfect. Emma knew it was perfect because she'd checked it 50 times. Sullivan closed the locker and turned back to her. "Outstanding attention to detail, Private Richardson." "Thank you, sir," Emma responded crisply. Morrison stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "Richardson, regulations state that during inspection, we examine the complete uniform and person of each recruit. That includes checking for unauthorized tattoos or markings that might be hidden beneath the uniform. Standard procedure. You understand?" Emma's heart stopped. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading for months. "Yes, drill sergeant," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant in her own ears. "Roll up your right pant leg," Morrison commanded. The barracks suddenly felt airless. Emma was aware of every eye in the room turning toward her, curious about this unusual request. Tattoo inspections typically happened during in-processing, not final evaluations. Why was Morrison checking now? With trembling hands, Emma reached down and carefully rolled up her right pant leg, revealing her calf. And there it was, the tattoo that had remained hidden for all these months. Morrison leaned forward to examine it, and Emma watched his expression change. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he simply stared at the symbol inked into her skin. Captain Sullivan moved closer, looking over Morrison's shoulder. When he saw the tattoo, he inhaled sharply. The tattoo was approximately 3 inches in diameter, a stylized phoenix rising from flames, but with specific modifications to its design. The flames formed specific patterns. The phoenix's wings incorporated symbols that only certain people would recognize. At the bottom, in small but clear lettering, were a date and a number. 08-27, 2019, 47. The barracks had gone completely silent. Every recruit watched, confused by the officers' reactions. Morrison straightened slowly, his face pale. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The harsh drill sergeant tone was gone, replaced by something Emma had never heard from him before. Respect. "Richardson, where did you get that tattoo?" "I earned it, drill sergeant," Emma said quietly. "Earned it how?" Emma met his eyes directly. "I'd rather not say, drill sergeant." Morrison and Sullivan exchanged a long look. Sullivan nodded almost imperceptibly, and Morrison turned back to Emma. "Lower your pant leg, Private. Inspection complete. Outstanding performance." Morrison moved on to the next recruit, but Emma could feel him glancing back at her. Could feel the weight of questions he wasn't asking. Could feel everything shifting in ways she didn't fully understand. The rest of the inspection passed in a blur. When Morrison and Sullivan finally left the barracks, confused whispers erupted immediately. "What was that about?" Benjamin asked, bewildered. "Why did Morrison look like he'd seen a ghost?" "What's special about Richardson's tattoo?" Charlotte wondered aloud. "Maybe it's gang-related," William suggested. "Maybe she was in a gang before enlisting." "Don't be stupid," Sophia cut in. "Did you see Sullivan's face? That wasn't disgust or concern. That was, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't negative." Olivia approached Emma, her expression serious. "Emma, what just happened? What's that tattoo mean?" Emma shook her head. "I can't talk about it. I'm sorry." "Can't or won't?" "Both." The speculation continued throughout the day, growing more elaborate with each retelling. By evening, half the platoon was convinced Emma had been part of some classified military operation before enlisting. The other half thought she'd been involved in something criminal that she'd somehow gotten immunity for. No one guessed the truth. That night, Emma was called to Morrison's office. She walked through the cool November darkness with her heart in her throat, unsure what to expect. Morrison was alone, sitting behind his desk with a folder open in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Emma sat, her posture rigid despite the informal setting. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Finally he spoke. "That tattoo on your leg, I know what it represents. So does Captain Sullivan, and so do a very small number of people in the entire United States military." Emma said nothing. "It's the mark of a survivor," Morrison continued. "Specifically, a survivor of the Sunrise Mall attack in Sacramento, August 27th, 2019. 47 people died that day in a coordinated terrorist attack. You were there." Emma's throat tightened. Hearing it said aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been for months. "The survivors formed a support group," Morrison went on. "Some of them got matching tattoos, a way to honor the dead and mark themselves as people who'd lived through hell. The specific design is known to law enforcement and military intelligence, but it's not public knowledge. Most people would never recognize it." He leaned forward. "But I recognize it, Richardson. You know why?" Emma shook her head. "Because my sister got the same tattoo. She was in that mall buying school supplies for her kids when the shooting started. She survived, barely, and she's never been the same since." Morrison's voice was thick with emotion. "So when I saw that mark on your leg, I knew exactly what you'd been through, and suddenly everything about you made sense." Tears welled in Emma's eyes despite her efforts to contain them. "You weren't running away from the army," Morrison said. "You were running toward it, trying to prove you could be strong again, trying to find purpose after trauma, trying to transform fear into discipline." He paused. "Am I right?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you put it in your enlistment paperwork?" "Because I didn't want special treatment," Emma managed to say. "I didn't want people to look at me with pity or lower their standards because they felt sorry for me. I needed to prove I could make it on my own merits, not because of what happened to me." Morrison sat back in his chair, processing this. "You were 17 when it happened, just a kid." "I was there with my mom," Emma said, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "We were shopping for my senior year of high school. We got separated when the shooting started. I hid in a storage closet for 4 hours while people died outside. When they finally evacuated us, I found out my mom was one of the 47. She'd been shot trying to shield a little girl she didn't even know." Morrison's expression softened completely. "I'm sorry, Richardson. I'm so damn sorry." "Everyone was sorry," Emma said, her voice bitter. "Everyone wanted to help me heal, to move on, to be okay again. But I wasn't okay. I was broken. The girl who used to run track and get straight A's and have plans for college, she died in that mall too. And I needed to find out if there was anything left inside me worth saving. So you joined the army." "I needed to face fear head on, to push my body beyond what I thought possible, to prove that I wasn't just a victim." Emma wiped her eyes roughly. "But I'm still weak, drill sergeant. I'm still the slowest runner, the one who barely passes. Maybe I was fooling myself, thinking I could be strong again." "You listen to me, Richardson," Morrison said firmly. "Physical strength is the easiest kind of strength to measure, but it's not the only kind that matters. You know what real strength is? Getting up every morning after trauma and choosing to keep fighting, helping other people even when you're struggling yourself. Refusing to quit even when everyone expects you to." He pulled out a document from the folder, Emma's evaluation scores. "You passed everything, not with the highest scores, but you passed. You met every standard the Army requires, and more than that, you showed character, leadership, resilience. Those qualities can't be taught, Richardson. You either have them or you don't, and you have them in spades." Emma felt something breaking open inside her chest, a tight knot of shame and fear and doubt that had been wound there since that terrible day in August 2019. "You're going to graduate basic training next week," Morrison continued. "You're going to become a United States soldier, and yeah, you might not be the fastest or the strongest, but you'll be someone your unit can count on when things get hard, because you already know how to survive the worst day of your life. Everything else is just details." For the first time in months, maybe years, Emma allowed herself to cry properly. Morrison handed her a box of tissues and waited patiently until she composed herself. "Does the rest of the platoon need to know?" Emma finally asked. "That's your choice, but for what it's worth, I think they'd understand you better if they knew. They respect you already, even if they don't fully show it yet. Knowing your story might help them see what I see, someone who's earned her place here the hard way." Emma nodded slowly. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." Morrison stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Dismissed, Private Richardson." "And Richardson, I'm proud to have trained you." Emma stood, saluted, and left the office. As she walked back to the barracks through the November night, she felt lighter than she had in years. The tattoo on her leg no longer felt like a secret burden. It was a mark of survival, of endurance, of transformation, and maybe, just maybe, she was finally becoming the person she needed to be. The final week of basic training passed in a flurry of preparation. The platoon practiced their drill and ceremony routines for the graduation parade. They completed final administrative tasks, updated their service records, and received orders for their advanced individual training assignments. The anxiety of evaluation week gave way to cautious excitement about what came next. Emma still hadn't decided whether to share her story with the platoon. Morrison had left the choice to her, and the weight of that decision pressed down daily. On one hand, keeping it private felt safer, more controlled. On the other hand, she was tired of hiding, tired of the whispers and speculation about the strange reaction her tattoo had provoked during inspection. 3 days before graduation, the decision was made for her. The platoon was in the barracks during evening free time when Charlotte approached Emma's bunk. Several others were nearby: Olivia, Sophia, Ava, Michael and Benjamin, ostensibly engaged in their own activities, but clearly listening. "Emma," Charlotte began hesitantly, "I don't want to pry, but what we saw during inspection. Morrison's reaction to your tattoo. People have been talking, making up stories, and I thought maybe you'd rather set the record straight yourself instead of letting the rumors get crazier." Emma looked around at the faces watching her, some curious, some concerned, all waiting. She thought about Morrison's words. "They respect you already. Knowing your story might help them see what I see." She took a deep breath. "Okay, you want to know about the tattoo? Everyone gather around, because I'm only telling this story once." Within minutes, most of the platoon had assembled near Emma's bunk, sitting on footlockers or leaning against wall lockers, forming a rough circle. Emma remained on her bunk, her heart pounding. "The tattoo commemorates the Sunrise Mall attack in Sacramento," Emma began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "August 27th, 2019. I was there." The mood in the room shifted immediately. Several recruits sucked in sharp breaths. Everyone knew about the Sunrise Mall attack. It had been one of the deadliest mass casualty events in California history, dominating news coverage for weeks. "I was 17, Emma continued. "I was there with my mom, shopping for school supplies. We just finished getting everything I needed for senior year when the shooting started." She paused, gathering strength. "We got separated in the chaos. I hid in a storage closet while people died. I could hear screaming, gunshots, people crying for help. I was in that closet for 4 hours before SWAT cleared the area and got us out." The barracks was completely silent. Even the usual background noises, someone shifting weight, a locker door creaking, had ceased. When they finally evacuated us, I learned that my mom was one of the 47 people who died that day. She'd been shot while trying to protect a little girl she didn't even know. The girl survived. My mom didn't. Emma's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. After it was over, some of the survivors formed a support group. We all had matching tattoos designed, a phoenix rising from flames, with specific elements that represented our shared experience. It was a way to honor the dead and mark ourselves as people who'd survived something we should never have had to endure. Olivia's eyes were glistening with tears. Sophia had her hand over her mouth. Michael looked stricken. "I didn't tell anyone when I enlisted because I didn't want special treatment," Emma explained. "I didn't want people looking at me with pity or lowering their standards because they felt sorry for me. I needed to prove to myself that I could be strong again, that I could face challenges and overcome them through my own effort." "That's why you never quit," Benjamin said softly, "even when everything was brutal and you were struggling. You'd already survived something so much worse than anything we faced here." Emma nodded. "Basic training was hard, harder than I expected, but I'd already lived through the worst day of my life. Everything else was just practice for being strong enough to live with that." Charlotte stood and crossed to Emma's bunk, wrapping her in an unexpected hug. "I'm so sorry." We all gave you such a hard time those first weeks, and you were carrying all of that." "You didn't know," Emma said. "And honestly, I needed you to push me. I needed to face real challenges, not have people going easy on me." One by one, other members of the platoon approached Emma, some offering hugs, others simply placing a hand on her shoulder or speaking quiet words of support. The hardened military training environment gave way for just this moment to simple human compassion. William wiped his eyes roughly. "Man, and I thought my life was tough because my dad wanted me to take over his construction business instead of enlisting. Put things in perspective real quick." "We all have our struggles," Emma said. "Mine are just more dramatic than most. But that's the thing about the army. We all come from different places, different backgrounds, different traumas. We're all here trying to become something better than we were." Ethan, who'd been quiet throughout Emma's story, spoke up. "During that medical training a few weeks back when I froze, and you helped me through it, you stayed calm because you'd already dealt with a real crisis, a life-or-death situation that makes our training scenarios look like games." "I guess so," Emma acknowledged. "When you've seen actual casualties, actual blood, actual death, simulated training doesn't shake you the same way." The conversation continued for another hour, with Emma answering questions about the attack, the aftermath, and her decision to join the army. It was exhausting but also cathartic. The secret she'd carried for months was finally in the open, and the response wasn't pity, it was respect. As the group gradually dispersed to prepare for lights out, Olivia lingered behind. "Thank you for trusting us with your story," Olivia said. "I know that wasn't easy." "It wasn't," Emma agreed. "But Morrison was right. You all deserved to understand where I was coming from, and honestly, keeping it secret was getting heavier every day." "You know what I think?" Olivia said. "I think you're the strongest person in this entire platoon. Not physically, let's be honest. You're still bringing up the rear on most PT tests." They both smiled at that. "But you've got something the rest of us don't. You've already been tested in ways we can't imagine, and you survived. When we deploy someday and things get real, you'll be the one who keeps her head while everyone else is panicking." "I hope you're right," Emma said quietly. "I know I'm right." The next 2 days passed quickly. The platoon's dynamics had shifted subtly but noticeably after Emma's revelation. People didn't treat her differently exactly, but there was a new understanding in their interactions. When she struggled during a final PT session, the encouragement she received felt genuine rather than obligatory. When she successfully completed a task, the congratulations were warmer. Graduation day arrived with crisp December weather and clear blue skies. The platoon dressed in their Class A uniforms one final time, ensuring every detail was perfect. Emma stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The person looking back was different from the frightened, uncertain girl who'd arrived at Fort Benning 3 months earlier. She was still short, still not the strongest or fastest, but she carried herself differently now, shoulders back, head high, eyes clear. She'd earned this uniform, she'd earned her place here. The graduation ceremony took place on the main parade field, with bleachers full of family members and friends who'd traveled to see their soldiers complete basic training. Emma had invited her Aunt Rachel, her only remaining close family, who sat in the third row with tears already streaming down her face. As the platoon marched onto the field in perfect formation, Emma felt a surge of pride. 3 months ago, they'd been a collection of uncertain individuals. Now they moved as one unit, their steps synchronized, their bearing military. Morrison stood at the side of the field, watching his platoon with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been something deeper. When the formation passed him, Emma could have sworn she saw him nod slightly in her direction. The ceremony included speeches from various officers, the presentation of training awards, and finally, the moment they'd all been working toward, the transition from trainee to soldier. Captain Sullivan called each name individually, and each recruit marched forward to receive their first duty assignment and have their basic training completion certificate placed in their hands. Private Emma Richardson. Emma marched forward with precise steps, her heart hammering. She saluted Sullivan, who returned the salute with a smile. Private Richardson, you are hereby awarded the completion of basic combat training. You have demonstrated the dedication, discipline, and character required of a United States Army soldier. He handed her the certificate and leaned in to add quietly, Outstanding performance, Private. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you, sir, Emma said, her voice strong and clear. As she marched back to formation, Emma caught sight of her Aunt Rachel in the bleachers, who was openly sobbing and clapping. She also noticed something else, Morrison standing off to the side, and next to him, a woman in civilian clothes who bore a striking resemblance to him. His sister, Emma realized, the one who'd also survived the Sunrise Mall attack. The woman was watching Emma with an expression of profound understanding and solidarity. Emma gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, and the woman nodded back. No words were needed. They were part of the same invisible community, survivors who'd chosen to keep living, keep fighting, keep moving forward despite the weight of their trauma. After the ceremony, Emma found Aunt Rachel in the crowd of families. Her aunt pulled her into a crushing hug. "I'm so proud of you," Rachel said through tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "I hope so," Emma said, her own eyes filling. "I did this for her. To prove that her sacrifice wasn't wasted on someone too weak to survive afterward." "Oh, honey, you were never weak. Surviving that day took strength. Getting through the grief took strength. And doing this, pushing yourself through 3 months of hell to prove something to yourself, that's the strongest thing of all." They spent an hour together, Rachel asking questions about training and Emma sharing the less traumatic stories. She introduced her aunt to Olivia, Sophia, Ava, and several others from the platoon. The pride in Rachel's eyes grew with each introduction, seeing that Emma had found not just military training, but genuine connections with these people. As the afternoon wound down and families began departing, Morrison approached Emma and her aunt. "Mrs. Richardson," he addressed Rachel. "Please, call me Rachel. Rachel, I wanted to introduce you to someone." Morrison gestured to the woman beside him. "This is my sister, Patricia Morrison. She wanted to meet your niece." Patricia extended her hand to Emma. "I saw your tattoo mentioned in the post-ceremony notes that my brother shared with me. I have the same one." She pulled up her sleeve slightly, revealing the identical phoenix design. Survivors recognize survivors. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "I didn't know anyone else in the military had gotten the tattoo." "There are a few of us," Patricia said. "Not many, but a few. We found our own ways of channeling what happened into something productive. For me, it was becoming a military spouse and supporting my brother's career. For you, it was joining yourself. Different paths, same determination to not let that day define us." "Your brother saved me," Emma said earnestly. "Not physically, but he gave me the chance to prove myself when most people would have just washed me out. He saw something in me I wasn't sure existed anymore." Morrison looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I saw a recruit who refused to quit. That's all any drill sergeant needs to see." "No," Emma said firmly. "You saw more than that. And you knew when to push and when to give space. And when you saw the tattoo, you understood immediately why I was really here. That kind of insight can't be taught." Patricia smiled at her brother. "Sounds like you found one of the good ones, James. A soldier worth the effort of training." "She did the work herself," Morrison replied. "I just provided the structure and the standards. Richardson met them. That's on her, not me." As Rachel and Emma prepared to leave the base for a celebratory dinner, Emma took one last look at the training grounds where she'd struggled, failed, improved, and ultimately succeeded. The obstacle course that had seemed impossible was just a collection of wooden structures and rope. The rappelling tower was just metal and cables. The running track was just packed dirt and determination. But what she'd gained here went beyond physical landmarks. She'd proven to herself that she could face difficulty and overcome it, that she could earn respect through persistence, that she could honor her mother's memory not by being defined by tragedy, but by refusing to let tragedy be the final word in her story. 3 months ago, Emma Richardson had arrived at Fort Benning as a broken survivor searching for purpose. Today, she left as Private Emma Richardson, United States Army, with orders to attend advanced individual training and the knowledge that she'd earned every single step of this journey. The tattoo on her calf would always be there, a permanent reminder of August 27, 2019, and the 47 people who didn't make it out of that mall. But now it represented something more than just survival. It represented transformation, resilience, the choice to take trauma and forge it into strength. As Emma and her aunt drove away from Fort Benning, headed toward whatever came next, Emma rolled down the window and let the cool December air wash over her face. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. The journey wasn't over. Advanced training awaited. Eventually deployment might await. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, more moments of doubt. But Emma had already survived the worst day of her life. She'd already proven she could transform weakness into strength, fear into courage, despair into determination. Everything else was just practice, and Private Emma Richardson was ready for whatever came next.